Welcome to Sounds Like Portraits. I'm Philippe Ungar. This is a conversation with creative humans. Please visit soundslikeportraits.com, and if you like this show, don't forget to subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or Google Podcast. And remember to leave us your comment and rating. It really helps new listeners find us. Thank you. Zhang was born in Beijing. Since before she could walk, she was trained to be a musician, not by choice, not by pleasure, but entirely due to her overbearing father. It was a hard time for her because he saw her as an animal he wanted to turn into a champion on stage. At 18 years old, she met Sergiu Luca, who became her mentor, and from him, she learned how to play music, and not only to play the violin to become successful and famous. Then she started to see music differently as a way to connect communities and to help people in need. In 2005, she created ZhangOmusic, and since she began to raise funds, not only to help people in need, but also musicians at the same time. That's the way a super talented violinist, member of the Orchestre Philharmonique de Monte-Carlo, became a social entrepreneur. The encounter with her mentor was key. So what's a mentor? That's the question of the week. Listen to her answer, but before she told me what she's always tried to do all her life.
All my life, I've always tried to find balance.
Balance between
Yes.
what and what?
Balance first within myself, the interior balance, and with the exterior world.
How did you find this inner balance? What helped you to get it?
Oh, I didn't say I found it. I said I've all my life been trying. This is I think it's my goal. It's always a movement. I believe that balance can only be achieved in movement. It's not static. It's in music as well. I believe balance can be achieved or should be achieved with contrast. I guess this is also coming from my background, my cultural background in Chinese philosophy, the yin and the yang, the shadow and the light, the masculine, feminine. So this concept, I think it's really very much part of my own beliefs, even though I haven't really studied it. And I left China at a very young age, but I think it's very much part of me. As I grew older, I found that seeking balance has become more and more essential, much more than seeking success, happiness, all these things that we're supposed to want. Finally, I think the most important thing can be resumed in this one word, is balance.
Could you develop a little about what you've learned from the Chinese philosophy about that?
Well, I basically grew up as a child migrant, that's the word now. I didn't go to school regularly until I was 18 years old. So I really didn't have a proper education. So there's a lot of missing points in my knowledge. Like I don't know any math. A lot of the things that I think we learn as children, and we should learn them as children, skills, I don't have them. But on the other hand, I was able to have the freedom to read what I wanted to read and to learn what I wanted to learn. So it's not a very typical, I would say,
Academy.
education.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, not at all, not at all. So I never studied Chinese philosophy or poetry or literature as a child growing up in China would have. But one of the things I used to love to do is reading. And I started to read before I could walk. I started walking rather late, after 2 years old, but I was able to read since it's ideograms. I think it's much more complicated to use the alphabet. As a Chinese child, I was able to start putting words together. And this was towards the end of the Cultural Revolution. And it was kind of chaotic. I lived with my grandparents. They were sent to the countryside. They were professors. And when I was born, my mother was in a labor camp. So was very lucky that my grandparents were allowed to come back to the city. So there was this handing over of the baby, because my mother was not allowed to come home. So I just started reading whatever books we had at home that was not confiscated. And it was quite, a mixture, because a lot of the books were taken by the Red Guards. And what made me interested into the Chinese philosophy, you would call, was from a book that a lot of children start reading. It's called The Journey to the West, and it's one of the Chinese classics.
What is it about?
Journey to the West, I think it's a combination of Chinese folk beliefs, religion, and philosophy, and the way we, do things. It's based on a real story about a Buddhist monk from the Tang Dynasty who walked all the way from China to India to learn about Buddhism. But this book is full of fantastic tales, and I think it promoted a lot of room for imagination. And as a child, this book was sort of a constant companion. And I always have a copy with me, even though I've moved a lot. So, and then of course I read poetry, Chinese poetry, Tang Dynasty, Song Dynasty. That's part of my, every Chinese child are supposed to memorize them. And I think it's so because I was taken away from my home, from my home country very young. I have this feeling of attachment to China, which may not really exist in reality.
You were born in Beijing. Tell me more about your family story in China. I'd like to know the context of your childhood.
My grandparents were Christians. My grandmother, she came from a very old Christian family. I think they became Christians since the 19th century. So she was born in 1907, but already in her generation, all the girls had natural feet. For 1,000 years, the Chinese practiced foot bounding, especially in the good families, because supposedly that will help them to marry into a good family. So the girls in my family already since the 1900s stopped doing this to the children. And all the girls received the same kind of education as the boys. And because they were Christians, they started school learning Chinese and English at the same time. And so that was the context. And then, of course, came the Great Cultural Revolution.
How old were you at the time?
I was born in the end of 71. So the revolution was not over, but it was slowing down. That's why my grandparents were able to return home. Although their house, they had a very beautiful house in Beijing University, and it's like a villa, European style. When they came home, the house was taken over by better families, like the red family. So they only had the kitchen of their own home. So they lived in the kitchen with me. I slept in a basket because my own mother, she was in a camp. My mother was quite well known in her own right. She was a child film actress and a professional artist. She was a pianist. And at this time, there was a camp outside of Beijing, a labor camp, specially curated for artists, which included musicians, dancers, writers, poets, painters. The idea is that for these sort of decadent people to learn from the peasants, how to do re-education, I think that was the word. So she was in this camp, but before she went in, she was already pregnant with me. So she was allowed to come out of the camp to give birth. And after 56 days after the birth, she had to report back to the camp and to remain. And so she was actually not able to take care of me. Very occasionally, she would get a day off. So from the very beginning, I was living with my grandparents in their kitchen. Talking about it, looking back, it seemed quite difficult. But I think that was just the way, people are resilient.
How do you explain that resilience in your family?
Well, I think my grandparents, their education and their background, I think being Christians, And also they studied sociology. I think that gave them some insight into human nature. I think they were, well, it was very difficult. I think they were able to have a certain distance and probably believe that this will pass.
So it's about education.
I think education helps. I think education gives them certain confidence, although many of their friends committed suicide at the height of the revolution, because these were very educated people, very sincere people who gave up very good situations overseas, coming back to help build the new China. So they felt very much hurt and betrayed, and some of them really just couldn't go on anymore. In my own life, of course, I didn't go through such challenges, luckily. I don't know what I would be or how I would survive if I did. But there were times when things were difficult for me for many reasons. I would think about what they've been through, since I know them very well personally. So I said, well, if they can survive that, surely things are not as bad as that. And I think resilience is about having hope when there seems to be no hope, and to believe that if you hold on, you can make it. I think you just have to tell yourself that sometimes, and not giving up.
Your family was very poor, and there was even no table in the family.
Oh, yes.
But there was a piano. Tell me this episode.
Well, my family was very poor by the time I was born. They weren't poor when my mother was a child. So that was very interesting too. And we talk about resilience, is that, less than 30 years separates my mother's childhood and mine. She used to wear dresses made in America. And she, as a child, I mean, I don't think she was spoiled in this family, but it was just a matter of fact that she would not go out unless her dresses were ironed by the gouvernante. She just refused to go outside. I mean, that's her education. By the time she had a child, that's me, we lived in a 9 square meter room, and she had to basically take apart her own clothes to make dresses for me or clothes for myself and my brother. So that was a big change. I think, as children, being poor wasn't a problem because I didn't know anything else. That was the size of our house, a 9 square meter room with a piano and a broken sofa was where I slept. The piano.
Yeah, tell me the story.
Yeah, well, that was my mother's piano. She's a pianist, and my father was a violinist. So this is essential. These are our instruments. That was it. I now I think about how big is 9 square meters. It's the size of a closet, probably. No, I mean, like, not even, maybe. And there was 4 of us. There was my little brother, myself, and my parents. So yeah, I was growing up in that environment.
How did your musical education start?
My father had decided I would be a violinist even before I was born. He was very ambitious. And so it was all decided for me. I studied violin from the age of 3 or 4. There was a break because he was arrested and imprisoned by Madame Mao, and I saw him get arrested. And so while he was gone, there was no music lessons.
Tell me about your training process with your father at the time.
Well, he was a very good violinist, I should say, at least for that generation, quite exceptional. He came from a big family. They were rather poor, poorer than my mother's family. And he only went to the Conservatory of Music because they had promised that when students are admitted, the school pays for everything. And he was 12 years old. He decided to try it so that, he would get room and board. He had many brothers and sisters, and he thought this would help his family. And I believe that he didn't even have any shoes. He just walked to the audition. But we have to say that at this point in the 1950s in China, there was really this openness, this education is open to all. So a child like my father, who had no money, no musical training, just walked into the National Music School audition and said, I want to try. And the professor said, well, what can you do? What can you play? He says, nothing. And they said, well, can you sing? At least so we can see if you have any ears, for music. He said, I don't know how to sing, but I can whistle. So they said, well, whistle us something. So he whistled some song. And they decided from that he had a musical ear. So they accepted him, and they decided that he was going to be a violinist. He didn't want that. He wanted to play the trumpet. So many years later, the training he received actually distinguished him as one of the most talented violinists.
So what about your musical training with him?
So his ambition was that his child would arrive at the same level of success, but internationally, because he himself could not. So that was his dream. It's actually more about him than about his child. So it would have not mattered if I was a boy or a girl. As soon as he knew that he was going to have a child, I think that was decided in his mind that he was going to train this child to be the violinist, which will be going beyond what he could do. So that is the premise. And once he started to teach me, I resisted.
What resisted in you to your father's teaching? Because right now you're a violinist.
Well, I think I realized that, to study a musical instrument as a child, there's many ways to teach a child music. And the way my father taught me, it was not to share music. It was training. I think it's the way you would train an animal to do race. Like I don't have any knowledge, but I think, when horses are trained to race or not even an athlete, I think I was treated, he thought of me as an animal that belonged to him, that he wanted to turn into a champion. And he used all his ingenuity and intelligence to create a method of teaching me in a very efficient way. Just like a coach, teaching an Olympic, swimmer or a tennis player or like that. So he really concentrated on how to give me the education that he didn't receive. He was very clever. I think he was a good teacher, but the motivation was wrong. It wasn't about art or culture. He wanted to create me into this machine, and that's how I feel it.
How did you resist?
Well, at this, when you're 4 and you're pretty much relied on your parents for survival, the resistance is pretty primitive. I think I would what he asked me to do, I just refused. And faced this kind of rebellion. And I think that he never expected that from a child and a little girl. So he would use what means he had to try to, make me obey. I was beaten every day. Really, like he would just, he tried to frighten me. He tried to, hurt me. I mean, not enough so that I couldn't play the violin anymore, but it was a very cruel upbringing. So when I think about my childhood, it's not the poverty that was the problem. I mean, yeah, we were poor, but so was everyone else. But it's really this abuse. Because I had a parent who wanted to create me into something that was useful for him. And he had no concern for my well-being or for my balance, I would say. I think even despite my resistance, I did manage to somehow play the violin all right. And so he would say to me, if you didn't play the violin, nobody would like you. People only like you because you know how to play the violin. It's not for you. It's because you play the violin. And this, I never believed him. And I hated to hear things like that. And I think this resilience for me came from because I was living in such a hostile environment within the home. And that's where reading helped. The books, what I read, what I could read. And my father actually thought of the books as he realized that the books had given me strength and probably intelligence. He didn't allow me to go to school because he said, well, you know how to read. don't waste time in school. You're going to be a violinist. So I had no friends. I was isolated. So all I could do is play the violin. And the books were kind of a refuge for me. And I remember once he got really angry because I didn't do the exercise as he wanted to. I kept all my books in a shoebox under the bed. I didn't have many. I used to go to the library, but I had some books. So he took it out and he started ripping the books apart.
Really?
And that was, yes, he said, no more books. Yeah, so for a long time, the violin and music to me was not something that I could love, because it brought up all these negative experiences. And also I felt that if I played well, I was losing my independence. If I played well, I've submitted to that. So for a very long time, that it was a very conflictual relationship. I've been thinking a lot about what music can do for humanity, how important is music for children, for education. I think it is very important, but I do hope that parents realize, they're giving their children musical education for the right reasons.
If you could go back and change one thing in your past,
Yes.
would you do it?
Change one thing. No, I think, no, given the context, there's nothing I could have changed. I think I've done everything I could at every given moment to be who I feel I should be. And I don't think I could have done it better. I mean, at this age, looking back as the child, all I feel is benevolence and all I feel is sympathy. And to say that, yes, you were alone, but you survived.
How did you go out from China?
We left China in 1981, and this was the beginning, of the opening after the Gang of Four. I mean, my father was, besides the personal conflict within the home, and he was, he had qualities, and he was very loyal to his friends, because he was arrested and they were telling him that just denounce your friends, that your group were anti-revolutionaries. But that was the political context at the time, and he refused to give names of his alleged group of anti-revolutionaries. So he went through a lot of difficulties, some kind of torture, abuse, and he was locked up. And then when the Gang of Four was themselves locked up, he suddenly came home. And I think after that, he really felt that, well, he wanted a new life. And also, as we mentioned, he was very ambitious. And at this time in China in the 70s, that we had no real idea what life was like on the outside. They had this false idea that as soon as you step over to the outside, everything will be fine. And we see this sadly today in some, a lot of the migrants who risk their life, coming to the West, imagining how their life would be. And reality sometimes is quite different from their ideals. And I think this was the case with my parents, my father certainly. He thought that if we can leave, that he would achieve his dream of being, famous and, again, fulfilling his ego and his ambitions. My mother's family had a lot of overseas relatives in Hong Kong, in America, in Thailand. So it was through these relatives that we were able to obtain a visa to go to Thailand. So my grandfather, his entire family was there. But the price to pay, and there was two things that happened. One was that my mother had, in the late 70s, had starred in a very beautiful movie that won many awards, including, I think, an international festival. They couldn't go and receive the awards, but she was a very accomplished actress. And I know now she would have been happy to stay in China to continue her career and also to remain with her family. Being poor didn't bother her. She wanted to just be with her parents, her large family, her children. But my father saw gold. He saw that if we could just leave China, it would be spectacular. So he forced my mother to give up her film career. She started shooting a very well-known film, which she had to be replaced, and to move, to go on. And I think that she did regret this decision. And also we had to leave my brother behind. And this was the policy then that the government...
That's horrible.
Yes, that's horrible. It's like Sophie's Choice, although less, because, you know, he didn't have to be, you know, killed by the Nazis. But my parents had to choose because the government understood that people like them, as soon as they leave, even on a 3-month visa, they won't come back. So they had to somehow make sure that they do, or at least make it not so easy for them. So they said, well, which child is going with you? And so my father decided it would be me. I was older. He said that because, you know, I needed to continue my violin education. Although my little brother was studying violin too. He was actually more gifted than I am. I think he would have been a better violinist. But my father decided it had to be me.
Where did you go when you left China?
We first went to Hong Kong, where my mother had, my grandmother's brother lived there. He's lived there since the 1930s. But after a while, we realized we couldn't stay because our visa was for Thailand, for Bangkok. And the Hong Kong government, you know, wouldn't accept any transfer of the status. We had to move on. And so we went to Bangkok, where my grandfather's family received us, except they've been in Thailand for many generations. They did not speak any Chinese. They spoke Thai, they spoke English, they spoke French. So even though they were close blood relatives, but they were strangers, and they were very wealthy. So for me, the biggest culture shock was Hong Kong. First of all, Hong Kong, because if you can imagine arriving from this fishing village on the other side of China, which is now a vibrant modern city, but in the 1980s, there was nothing. There was a shack. And Beijing, even in the 1970s, you know, millions of bicycles, very few lights at night, very few cars. And then boom, Hong Kong at night. You know, for me, it's like the Blade Runner, you know, you see this futuristic 3D place, or like the Fifth Element, you know, cars. Like for me, it was really, that was the shock. I've never seen so much light in one place. The noise, the smell, everything. Hong Kong, for me, that was a different planet. And then a few weeks later, when we went to Bangkok, we lived with one of my mother's cousins who had a huge villa, swimming pool. I think he had 7 or 8 domestics, 6 or 7 cars with chauffeur. So, and for a child who grew up in a 9 square meter room, and this was again, you know, it was quite a adventure, I should say. I mean, in a very short time, my world completely changed.
How did you react to that?
I think the sense was, first there was this novelty idea, you know, everything was new. It's like there's this overstimulation of all these, what you can see, what you can hear, what you can taste, you know, everything was new. But at the same time, there was a deep sense of isolation and a loss of identity. Because when we don't speak the language, we cannot communicate. When we cannot communicate, there's this sense of distance between other human beings. And yeah, it was a very lonely time. I think I had a very lonely childhood. So when we were in Thailand, my parents also, I think for a child to see her own parents not sure of where they are, you know, when you see your own parents being scared, being lost, that's a very traumatic moment for any child. And also I felt I should help, but how? And so there was a sense of guilt as well, you know, guilt towards my brother. My father used that, actually, you know, this is the kind of person that he was. He used to say, look, we sacrificed your brother so you could be here. So you need to merit this, you know, so that I don't regret choosing you to come with us. And those are the kind of ways that he tried to make me to obey, you know, to play the violin, to do all these things.
That's an amazing pressure on you.
Yes. And all linked to the violin. And that's why for me, it was a very much a conflictual relationship I had with my profession, actually, with my profession, with my art, with my instruments, with who I am. So yeah, growing up was not having any friends, not going to school, always being with adults, and finding myself in different situations, like playing in a prime minister's residence in Thailand, playing in front of the king. There's a lot of spectacular moments as well, going into palaces, and so things that were so contrasting with what I know. I mean, by this time I was 10 or 11 years old. I joined the Bangkok Symphony Orchestra, which is co-curated by my parents at 11 years old, because everyone else were amateur musicians from the different embassies or industrialists, and I was part of this orchestra. So there was fun too, for a child not having to go to school. I mean, if we turn it around, that I was having this adult life, discovering things. I was taken everywhere. It was a very strange upbringing, and at the time, all I really wanted was to go to school and be like every other child.
How did you come to meet Sergiu Luca, the man you call your mentor?
Yes, my maître. That changed everything.
I'd like you to talk about the first encounter.
Yes, I'm coming to that. And this is very Chinese way. I like to set up the story so the atmosphere, This is how we tell stories. By the time I was 15 or 16, I started to have a small career, not a big one. I by no means not a prodigy, but I had already by the time played my debut with the Toronto Symphony, the kind of things that you're supposed to do as a child musician, doing competitions. By then I had a different teacher, a Russian teacher who was a very good violinist, but at the same time, it's still the same modality, is training me to be this star. I just want to add to this point, when we arrived in Canada, the reason why we got to Canada, we were quite happy in Thailand, because Thailand was still Asia. We had family, and then after a few years, we spoke Thai. My parents were considered respectable artists, and since there was not much classical music, so they had social status. We weren't rich, but we were very much respected. But our visas ran out. We were still Chinese citizens. And the Thai government, from time to time, they go through this anti-communist thing. The government changes in Thailand regularly. The king doesn't change, but the government did. So right before this historic concert of the Bangkok Symphony, which is the first symphony orchestra in the history of Thailand, my father was the soloist. I was in the orchestra. We prepared for months. Our visa ran out, and the immigration, usually just, because we knew people knew people, stamp, another year. They said, no, you've been here long enough. This time we're not going to renew it. So everybody, had contacts to the government and royal family. There, no can do. This time they said, no, they have to go back to China. And the date we're supposed to leave was before the concert. So since many of the amateur musicians who played in the orchestra, they worked for Western embassies, they said, well, there's one trick you can do, is apply immigration to one of the Western countries. And the procedure is that they will send you a letter to say, we will consider your candidature. And usually they make you wait 1 or 2 months. So this way, you show this to the Thai immigration. They said, we're not staying in Thailand. We're just waiting to, that way we can do the concert. And this is the fun part. As we've never been to any Western countries, I think the countries were Australia, Canada, US, and Denmark. That was possible. So I said, oh, let's choose Canada because it has such a nice flag with a maple leaf. so we applied to the Canadian embassy for immigration status. And so we obtained the waiting time. We did the concert, big success, and all the ambassadors came to the concert. And there was a reception. At the reception, the Canadian ambassador at the time came to my parents and said, Canada will be very proud to welcome you. So we had to go. It was approved. And we arrived in Canada in one of the coldest winter in the century, from Thailand, tropical country. So I went through that whole, not speaking the language, the whole thing again, added to the trauma. But this time in Canada, it's a different kind of country already. We're right in Toronto. Never been there. We don't know anyone there. The Toronto, the Conservatoire, it's called the Royal Conservatory of Music. Somebody introduced us to the director. My father, this is what he does when we go to places. He just put me in front and asked me to play. I'm like the stage monkey, you know. I would just go through my program and then people would know what a great teacher he is. That's why he had to be me and not my brother, because I was useful. So I played in front of the director of the Conservatoire, and who was a very nice man. He was a cellist. And he said, oh, wait. I was in the middle of some Paganini thing. And then he said, just wait, please wait. And he ran off. And he came back with another man. And he said, please begin again. So I went through again. So this other man was the famous Russian violin teacher, a student of David Oistrakh, you know, from Moscow. And so the director said to my father, he said, we can see you are a great teacher. We will be happy to offer you a job as a teacher in our school. But he said, I think your daughter needs a new teacher now. You've done a great job. And I recommend, you know, Mr. Danchenko here. So my father, before he knew it, for him, I was stolen from him. His little performance monkey was taken from him. And he couldn't say no, because this was his new boss in exchange for a job. And that was actually a good thing. So I studied for 6 years with Mr. Danchenko, and I learned many different things, and this was important. But still, the trajectory was towards a career of a soloist, doing competitions. He had it all planned for me. And meantime, at home, my father he couldn't accept the fact that I belonged to another teacher. And every time I succeeded, he took it as an offense. So he continued to be really nasty to me. And that was a different kind of abuse, you know. And at the time, I was becoming quite tired of what was happening. Every teacher, every mentor, every masterclass I went to, everyone is telling me the same things. And I felt that it was just, something was missing. I didn't know what it was. I just feel like I was propelled to this destiny that wasn't my choosing, you know, always having to, it's very competitive, you know, in classical music, especially instruments like violin. I describe it recently as running a marathon that has no end. You never arrive. And you're told to try to catch up to the person in front and keep looking back that no one's catching up to you. I mean, at least that's how I felt growing up. It's always about being the best. And it added to a lot of very toxic self-image. You know, I think a lot of today we talk about, you know, especially women, girls, you know, how they see themselves in the mirror, you know, how they consider themselves, you know, what is beauty. But I think in classical music at this time, it was very much about, you know, you are judged by how many competitions you've won, what kind of agent that will sign you up. Even though I was in this race and I was doing all right, something was missing. So I was very open to playing for different people, different masters. And so I made an appointment on the phone with Mr. Luca. He said, well, come to my home. I remember arriving. He had a very beautiful bungalow in Houston, and it was full of modern art, statues, you know, art, furniture that was strange, you know. And he was this big, cheerful man, and he had a huge dog. Mr. Lucas sat down, and he said, well, play something for me then. And the dog sat next to Mr. Luca, and he didn't move. The whole time was Mr. Luca and the dog. So I played. I was trained for that. I had this whole program, you know. I just went through the motions. And by this time, I was used to people telling me, you know, this is good, that is good. And there were many teachers, famous teachers by that time, who wanted me to study with them. I was about university age, even though I didn't even go to high school, but there was a few famous teachers who wanted me to join their studio. And they do that sometimes because it's easy, because the hard work has been done for somebody else. At the moment of arriving at career, you know, they're able to harvest. And I wasn't sure where I wanted to go. So Mr. Luca listened to everything I said, and he said, good. He said, now tell me, what do you like about your playing? I said, what do you mean? He said, yeah. He said, we all know what we don't like about ourselves, all our defaults. I said, what do you think you're good at? Nobody has ever asked me that question before. What do I think I'm good at? So I said, well, he said, yeah, you need to know what is good in your playing. So I actually had to think about that. Originally, here's someone original. So I said, well, I think I have a pretty good sound. He's like, yeah. So I listed, tentatively what I think is good. I wasn't sure what he's trying to, is this a test? Is this a trap? So he said, yes. He said, we all need to know what we're good at. He said, well, you have some problems. I said, thank you. I said, you see that, don't you? Because my teacher at the time didn't think I have any problems. And all I got from adults, famous teachers, like, you are great, you're going to be a star, come to me, I'll make you famous, pretty much. Here was someone who said, you have problems. I said, yes, thank you. I said, you see that? He said, but we can fix them. Just like that. He said, but we can work on that. We can fix them. It's not, mortal problems. And he had a sense of humor. So I immediately felt this is someone for me. Returning to the Chinese folk stories, it's like there's always this archetype of the old man from the mountains who lives in the bamboos in the mountains, who's above the world, and he's a little bit, immortal. Here I met my, immortal, who's going to teach me something different. So then he says, well, I teach at Rice University. And then I said, but I don't have a high school diploma. He said, you didn't graduate. I said, I didn't go. So he said, that might be a problem. So he said, well, we'll see what we can do. So long story short, I know at that time, I don't know about since, I was the first student to be admitted to Rice University in Houston without a high school diploma, without any diploma, without any SAT, without anything. Mr. Luca convinced the president of the music school and then the dean of the music school, who went to see the president of the university, to give me a chance. So I know that a lot of people worked really hard to give me a future, and I'm eternally grateful for that. I didn't realize it at the time. All they said is, could you send us something? Just write something about yourself so we know that you can read and write. And they said, we need you to be literate. So I had an old typewriter, I wrote basically my story up till 18 years old as it was. Probably a lot of errors, but they accepted me with a full scholarship. And of course, my parents, especially my father, he didn't think that was a good idea because he thought I should go to one of these star maker teachers.
And again, you resisted.
Oh yes, this is my life. And also I liked the idea it was a university. It was not a music school or conservatoire. I've never been with young people my age who were not musicians. I've never been in an environment where they taught anything else. But that changed everything for me. That opened up the whole world for me. As you can imagine, you live in the States, you can imagine a private school in the US famed for having students with perfect SATs. I mean, they really, it's a small school, but they have very high academic standards. And the first year, we all lived on campus. And of course, most of the kids were, double majors, engineering, computer science, and nerds, like little geeks. So boys used to pick up girls by asking, what was your SAT average? And I would answer, what's that? And you can imagine, they looked at me as an alien. What do you mean? I said, well, I don't. So they explained. I said, well, I didn't do any of that. They said, but how did you get in here? So for the whole first year, when I met people, more or less, is how did you get in here? I was an imposter. We had to go through all that to get in here. You have none of that. But I was, and professors too, because I had to take other classes. Humanities 101, Science 101, all these other non-musical classes. I remember doing Science 101, which was obligatory for all non-science majors. But the level was, trigonometry, chemistry, you're supposed to have learned that. So we were taught by TAs, doctorate students. I remember not understanding anything. I don't even know algebra. So At the end of the class, I would go to the teacher. I said, I'm sorry, I didn't understand. So the TA said, well, which part of the class did you not understand? I said, well, all of it. And he would say, what do you mean all of it? So I would go through this, and sometimes they just said, maybe you should just drop the class, because wait till next year. But this was the miracle of Rice University. I hope it's still like that. Not only was I not rejected, many professors went out of their way to help me, just taking the time to help me understand the basics. I skipped exams. I didn't go because I thought, well, I'm going to fail anyway. Why should I go? I just practiced. All sorts of things that students my age would have known. I didn't. How to go to school, how to do homework, how to take notes, how to socialize. I mean, so at the age of 18, I think that was the turning point of who I am today.
Coming back to Sergiu Luca,
Yes.
you call Sergiu Luca your mentor. What did you learn from him?
I learned music from him. Up until I met him, I played the violin. I played an instrument. Like a well-trained little monkey. Not to say that monkeys would want to do that. I think they would resist, more. And that's not to disrespect any other young artist who was doing the same thing as I did. I speak from my own self, my own path. Nobody ever really talked to me about music, but why we play music, why we play the violin. It was all about, you play the violin to become a famous violinist. And when you become a famous violinist, you will do this. So the actual career was explained to me, but not the art. I think some of my teachers themselves didn't know. They were just passing on what was taught to them. So I don't really blame them, not even my father, I suppose, because for him, music was a way for him to get out of poverty, to become someone. So I think that's how he saw it. But in Mr. Luca, I met an artist and a great teacher. Why I say that is that a lot of music professors, even great musicians, they would teach their students to become lesser copies of themselves. Whereas Sergiu Luca is unique in the sense that none of his students played like each other. And he encouraged that. Whereas similarly, other teachers' students, in America, you say cookie cutter models, big or small, they were all pretty much generally identical, trying to sound the same. And I think that's a problem in music. We all end up now sounding the same. In the old days, in the 40s, 30s, great musicians, when you hear them on the radio, you can tell this is Jascha Heifetz, this is Nathan Milstein, this is David Oistrakh, or the singers or the pianists, Horowitz, Rubinstein, them. Now, you say, oh, that sounds beautiful, but you have no idea who it is. It could be a number of people. It's a question of what we think is important. And Sergiu was accepting students. He only had 10 students. He wouldn't want any more. And he was teaching us in a way that I've never experienced. And he was curious. He was a problem solver. Let me give you one example. We had one student. She was an American girl. She played quite well. But she had one problem is that whenever she played on stage, she had to stop in the middle of the piece. It's psychological. She gets stressed. So she would sabotage herself or just stop. And for us to stop in the middle of the performance, it's worse than death. You never stop. So she always does that. So she's unable to play one piece from beginning to end without stopping. So Sergiu made her play every time we had a class recital. No matter what she was playing, she had to be on the stage. So right in the middle, I said, here he goes, boom, she stops. And then she goes on. Once she did the stop, the rest is okay. But with this kind of handicap, you cannot really get a job or do other things. So he just pushed her out there and helped her to get over this fear. And the day when she didn't stop, she almost did, but she didn't. We all cheered because for her, this is a big triumph. And so a lot of teachers wouldn't have the patience or wouldn't have the benevolence to help someone with this, because it wasn't really technical, but it was more psychological. And also where he was unique is that two of my classmates, lovely young people, but they were just a little less advanced for different reasons. a boy and a girl. And Mr. Luca took them aside, took him to dinner privately, and very kindly said, I appreciate your love for the violin, for the music, but this is a very difficult profession. He said, I think you might struggle, and I wouldn't want to see that. Is there anything else you want to do in life? To offer them this idea to say that it's not a shame to pursue another career while keeping the love for this. So one of them became a psychologist, one became a successful dentist who created his own amateur music festival. He still plays. And to me, this is worthy of respect, because a teacher's job is to help the students to have a fulfilled life as an artist or living with music. And he was able to say to these two students who he felt they would not have a very fulfilling musical career, and while they were still young, to give them an option and to help them through that. And that I've never seen other professors. And personally, for me, I resisted him as well, because this was how I dealt with, persons in authority. And we had huge clashes. And later, when I came to Europe, I had the honor to play with musicians that Sergiu played with, colleagues. They asked me to join them, and they said, we heard a lot about you even back then. We didn't know you then, but he would say, I have the student, she's Chinese, she's so talented, but she fights me, she's very resistant, I really want to help her. So, but sadly, Mr. Luca passed several years ago. So I think of him often, and sometimes when I'm facing situations, I always try to imagine what he would advise me. Not only in music, but in life. For instance, once I went to, we used to do these musical jobs, we call gigs, to make some pocket money. And once I went to a gig and the people were really not very nice to the musicians, so I complained about it. And Sergiu said, I was saying, they were so rude, they were this. And Sergiu said, did you get paid? I said, well, yeah. I said, well, what's the problem? That was his philosophy. He said, you did this for money. You got the money. It's over. I think he was the father that I didn't have.
What does the word interpretation mean to you now as a musician?
Interpretation. I think it depends what musical composition we're talking about. I'm from the school, and this is from Mr. Luca as well, to foremost, instrumentalists were here to bring the music composed by the composers. We're a vehicle to bring this music to the public. It's a translation in a way. The composers translated their thoughts onto the paper, into notes. We translate those notes into live music. So foremost, we respect what the composers intended to do, which means that I don't play how I feel. First of all, is what did the composer wrote? And I think this is a problem today, especially in certain parts of the world. We're still producing young artists, young instrumentalists to be virtuosos, which means play as fast as you can, as loud as you can, without any respect or even notion of what the style is, what period of music, what instrument was played on. So it's a kind of a musical literacy, I think, that sometimes that are neglected, which I found to be incorrect. But again, sometimes these people are very famous without ever actually respecting what was written on the page. So for me, interpretation is foremost that our job is not using composers' music as a beautiful dress to present myself, whereas I am a vehicle to transport this music to the public.
When you play something many times on stage,
yes,
do you always feel the same feeling? Do you always have the same emotion?
Oh no.
What does it depend on?
I drink green tea every day, the same tea, but we're not the same every day. Even if you do the same exact gestures, you wake up, you brush your teeth, you make your tea, you drink it, it's not the same if you really think about it. Or maybe you think, it must be the same, but we are never the same. If I play a piece of Bach now, 10 minutes later I play it again, it will be different. So I think that's the magic of music, is that, especially since for over almost 20 years, I play with a jazz guitarist in my band, and he never plays the same things twice, never. At least in classical music, because it's written, the notes are the same, the distance are the same, this is the same, but the feelings are not. So I think that's what you're saying, interpretation. Um, in classical music, for me, there is a certain discipline. Observing for instance, French music, like Claude Debussy or Maurice Ravel or Messiaen, they are very precise. The markings, sometimes every measure, it would say pressé, mais pas trop, or, serré, things like that. So I was really shocked when I heard some top level students preparing for competitions playing for me. I was invited to hear them in China, the top school, and the Chinese win competitions, playing Debussy, Tchaikovsky, Bach exactly the same way. What Sergiu would say, you're playing the violin, but not the music. Stop playing the violin, play the music. So I remember asking this young student who played quite well the violin in Beijing, I said, do you know this composer, Debussy? Because I know the piece Sonate de Debussy. I said, did you actually look at what he was writing there? And she said, well, it's in French. That, I mean, it's not her fault. It's the teachers, because the teachers doesn't know, and nobody bothered to check. All you need is a dictionary. So I think that is irresponsible to teach. Let me give you an example. This is something that I see a lot. Shakespeare plays or Molière. So you have a troupe of very beautiful young actors, actresses. Romeo is a beautiful young man, Juliet, beautiful young girl, and they all have beautiful voices, diction, but they're illiterate. They're saying things phonetically. They have no idea what they're saying. They're being taught to repeat these things and to do the gestures. So yeah, there is a certain aesthetic. They're agréable to look at and hearing the voice, but there's no meaning because they don't know what they're saying. Whereas you can have other troops, maybe the actor's a bit older, a bit fatter, not so pretty, but they know the role, they understand. One of the biggest problems in classical music today, instrumental, is that we're producing young artists who plays beautifully, very clean, they look nice, they're trained in all the external facts, like a beautiful Juliet who looks perfect for the role, but she has no idea what it's all about. I used to be like that myself.
You said you're a conduit on stage. What kind of experience are you looking for yourself when you're playing on stage?
Now it's very different. For almost 15 years or more, I started doing ZhangOmusic, and I completely changed my idea, or not changed. My idea of why I play music, I personally, has evolved. After studying with Sergiu Luca, with my master, I felt that I was a messenger for music. I was this vehicle to translate music written by the composers to the public and try to do as good a job as I could to recreate. It's like we're museum, conservators, curators. But since I started doing musical philanthropy, my idea completely changed. I feel like music can serve a much bigger purpose. Before, it's like we were serving people who already had the means and the understanding to appreciate this language. And it was quite exclusive. About 20 years ago, still in the system. Now I'm completely out of it. I play less and less masterpieces, classical masterpieces. In my concerts, I mixed everything together because I want to reach a maximum number of people. I want people to feel they're included. So I try to play different style of music. I play with a jazz musician who doesn't use any partition. We play outside the concert hall most of the time now. I think we have to realize that it's a human language. It doesn't only belong to those who know or who can afford it or who has had the training. I think music should be a human right. A few years ago, I went to Africa for the first time. In Kenya, I'm part of a group that contributed to help build a school there, and we continue to help them. In the village, we offered them cows. So we went to visit them, and the whole village came to greet us, wearing their brightest colors. It's a Maasai village. And that really changed for me, because they came out and they sang and danced. I danced with them, this kind of jumping, leaping dance. But the music was so sophisticated. The songs they sang. I mean, these people, they have no electricity, no running water, but I've never met such musical people. All of them participated. And then when I heard the children, and of course I had my violin, so I played for them. I was in the middle of the village. The middle is an open ground, because at night they put their cattle there, away from the lions. So we were standing in the middle, and all the villagers are around in their colorful dresses. So I start with Bach. I always start with Bach. I played Bach. I played some jazz. I played the Marseillaise. I don't know why. I thought, while I'm here, I played the Marseillaise. I played James Bond. I played Star Wars. I played all sorts of music. I was alone. And it's interesting because they listened. They've never seen a violin or heard this music, but they understood it. How can I say that? No, they didn't get it.
How did you see that they understood your music? What was the point?
Because first of all, I heard them sing before I started. So I know they understand music and quite sophisticated. They're musical. And they listened. They were joyful. They were curious. They were joyful. And certain pieces, they caught the rhythm, especially the children. It was amazing. I've never seen such musical children. These children were clapping in places I never thought. They heard it differently. It was much more sophisticated, their sense of rhythm. And they were interacting with me in a way that I've never seen. And the joy, they were dancing to this music. We were sharing this moment. I just, with my little violin, it was 4 strings, and there we were celebrating. That is just a confirmation that this is what music is about. This is what music is about. We don't speak the same languages, but we can share. There was such a feeling of friendship and just happiness. So this is a highlight, of course. And in my other work, I've played in other places for other people, handicapped people, old people, migrants. My work is to use music to raise concrete funding to help the poor, help the needy.
Tell me more about the partnership you created between sponsors, performers, audience, and charity organizations.
Oh, yeah. The business model of ZhangOmusic, it all started, when I first came to Monaco in 2000, I quickly realized that people have this perception of Monaco being a place for the super rich. It's not so. It's actually a very interesting, dynamic, innovative place, and very inclusive. I mean, I'm proof of that. I came here, I didn't know anyone. I got a job in the Orchestre Philharmonique de Monte-Carlo, but I received such support from the people of Monaco, people who live here, which is an international community, and from the government, the prince's government. I'm not rich, I'm not married, so I'm just me, this Chinese woman with a violin. Yes, people are wealthy here, but they're also very generous. So very soon I saw that everyone I knew in Monaco, the new friends I had, they were all involved with at least one and sometimes several charity organizations. So my very first philanthropy concert that I created was after the Southeast Asia tsunami. Do you remember this huge tsunami that happened on the day after Christmas?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So on January, just right after that, I created a concert in the Anglican Church in Monaco. They had a fund through the church to help fishermen in Sri Lanka, because that was really hard hit. And I tried to invite everyone I knew. And because this catastrophe was so enormous, and also a lot of people here in Monaco, they go to Thailand, they go to Southeast Asia for holidays, they felt it concerned them. The church was full. The concept was very simple. I said, well, give what you want. We don't have a ticket office, nothing. She said, we're offering a concert, come in here, the money goes to the church in its entirety. And after that, I realized that even as I have no fortune to donate, music can be transformed into actually a generator of concrete and immediate aid right after that. So that started the ZhangOmusic concept. But the immediate question was, okay, how long can you go on giving free concerts? These are my friends, they would agree to play with me for free once or twice, but it can't be all the time. This is for sure. So the logical idea was that, well, we need to find some money to pay for the concert, for the setup. If we need to rent a venue, well, the musician has to be paid, all the other fees, insurance. I didn't know that you needed insurance to create a concert. I knew that now. One of the other things in Monaco is that there's a lot of banks. And maybe because I had a very unusual upbringing, I was not embarrassed to ask for money. A lot of my friends, they think it's very humiliating to go ask for money. A lot of my classical music colleagues, they wouldn't do it. They said, no, we can't, do that. And I said, well, I can. I said, that's okay. At least they'll hear about our concert. And also, thanks to a few friends who helped me in the very beginning, friends who were in finance and entrepreneur, not musicians, they have connected me to bankers. They connected me to industrials, or themselves participated. So, I had a lot of support in the beginning. People say to me, yeah, but why do the sponsors give you money to create a concert? Why don't they just give the money directly to the cause? I said, yeah, why don't they? But they don't sometimes. First of all, sometimes they don't even know about the cause, because I only support really small causes. The kind of projects I support are very grassroots, that even a few €100 can really make a difference. So the banks and the big industries, they wouldn't really hear about it, and they're solicited all the time. So a concert is a very good way of connecting NGOs who are really doing concrete work on the ground. And also, we talk a lot about social responsibility these days. Companies, industries, individuals, they're very interested to participate, to give back to society. But sometimes these people tell me, they said, we would like to give back, but to who? How? We want to be sure the money goes to the right place, but we don't have time to actually follow up. So we need to know where this is going to, because it's also the image of our brand, image of our company. So these concerts reassure that, because at the concert, we bring in the NGO. They're there. First of all, to collect the money. I never touch the money. It goes to them. It's very easy for me to say, okay, you want to give, here's the box, they take it away. And also, they always come on stage to explain. And this, I think, is important for the audience to actually see the people working in Afghanistan, helping little girls go to school, or building wells in Africa, or, giving vaccine to migrant children. You see them, and there's interaction. People can ask them questions after to say what you're doing. And usually after our concerts, and that's something I take pride in, is that usually a few audience members will sign up with the NGO and continue to support them afterwards. So I feel like music is a bridge, and after 15 years, we've made more than 60 events, helping more than 30 countries. I think the model works. And also, for a lot of the sponsors, supporting a musical concert is really not that expensive, if I may say so. I've had banker friends said, actually sponsoring a concert is cheaper than inviting our clients to dinner. So there's that too.
I'm gonna leave my place for a minute. Please take the time to add whatever you want to this interview. I come back in a minute.
Okay. I actually have no idea for how long we've been speaking, and whether it was chaotic or there's any sense in what I've said. At this point of my life, I think the most important thing I feel is that my music can serve a purpose. When I go on stage, when I share my music, I'm able to help individual people, or even an animal, or even a place in nature. And I think that's the essence of what I feel to be the most important right now. I hope there will be other musicians joining me in this endeavor to think about how we can innovate our business model to be more involved and actively engaged towards our communities, especially since this unprecedented crisis of COVID-19 around the entire world. Our industry has collapsed. All our performing arts colleagues, music and dance and theater, were faced with a crisis that we've never really seen before on such a scale. So I think it's a good time, an important moment for us to innovate, to find new ways, working with available technology, how we could continue to share our art, but also how we could contribute actively to society. I think the world needs more beauty than ever. There's a lot of confusion, there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of sadness. As artists, I think we have a responsibility towards humanity, and we have the power to make a difference and to offer hope. I think that's it. What else? This is hard to speak alone.
Thank you, Zhangjung, for sharing your story. It was Sounds Like Portraits, a podcast by Philippe Ungar. Please visit soundslikeportraits.com, and if you like this show, don't forget to subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or Google Podcast. And remember to leave us your comment and rating. It really helps new listeners find us. Thank you. Music Charmeuse de Serpent, composed and conducted by Olivier Glisson. See you soon for the next episode.